I'm sorry. Pardon. I'm sorry.
So if you're just joining us now, media is located right outside the Higanya precinct here, where we just saw one of two DOC inmates arrested, charged again with promoting prison contraband. Those two inmates we saw named before, Sean Johnson and Bruno Simmons. They were being held in Post 6 and allegedly involved in that major scheme to smuggle prison contraband into the prison. As we told you over the last few weeks, that all started after an investigation with the Guam Police Department resulted in several people being arrested, including the lead of internal affairs over at the Department of Corrections. So several officers we know remain under house arrest for their alleged part in that scheme. And today the Guam Police Department confirming that they did follow-ups to that investigation. Both Simmons and Johnson continue to be held separately over at Post 6, the maximum security unit. However, they're confirming that on Friday and Saturday during their follow-up investigations that they worked in coordination with the Department of Corrections to conduct a shakedown there at the Manilao compound, and what they found was more contraband. They didn't say specifics of what exactly was located, but they did say that some of those charges not include promotion of that contraband and possession of a Schedule II controlled substance. We just saw one of the inmates make their way into the Higanya precinct for processing. We're waiting for a second person to make their way in now.
Very good.
Can you send this first one? Half a day, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're just joining us, an update to that contraband investigation that's been unfolding over at the Department of Corrections in recent weeks. We're here in Higanya at the Higanya precinct, where we're waiting for a second individual, a second inmate being charged for being caught with more prison contraband to make their way, being walked into the Higanya precinct for processing, and they will then be returned over to the prison. And while we're waiting for this, I mean, also waiting to hear from the Department of Corrections management in all this. Yesterday, during the Labor Day holiday, we continued to follow this story, and in an interview with the Department of Corrections Director Tony Lamorena, he had informed us that, yeah, you know, this was a blow to them. It was a shock to him, he admits. And they, of course, have to now, with the loss of the officers and staff, at least 6 of the officers that have been removed, one resigning and the rest on admin leave and under house arrest pending this case, they have to shift personnel to make do, because as Department of Corrections Tony Lamorena has said throughout his tenure at the Department of Corrections, is that they're 24/7 operation. It's a prison. No doubt they have to do what they can to ensure the safety of those not just out in the community and living around the prison, but the safety of everyone that's also there in those prison walls, the staff especially. And despite all that, he contends and continues to say that morale is up, and that the officers are doing what they can to carry on with the mission, and that's ensuring the safety of everyone there at the prison as well as around the community. So earlier, if you were watching and you can catch the rebroadcast of this live stream once it gets posted, is we saw one of the inmates being charged with possession of prison contraband, and there's also an additional charge of possession of a Schedule II controlled substance that could be anywhere from a harsher drug such as ice, methamphetamines, and what have you. The specifics, of course, we are waiting to hear more from maybe from the Guam Police Department, who's investigating, or from the Department of Corrections, as they are working collaboratively to investigate this ongoing scheme that's been happening at the Department of Corrections in recent months. And I mean, it hasn't been made clear exactly how long this might have been going on, because some of the officers we've learned have been doing this since they were hired in December. Others have been there for 3+ years, and of course we know that the former lead now of Internal Affairs at the Department of Corrections, Lieutenant Jeff Limo, has been there 20+ years. He was actually on the brink of retirement when all this was unfolding. So the two inmates being charged and being accused most recently, and that we're waiting for to give you this update, is Bruno Simmons and Sean Johnson. We heard their names. They were charged and magistrated and then appeared before the judge to answer to charges of promoting prison contraband and bribery in the case involving those officers. But this is now a separate case and still in connection, because on last Friday and Saturday, the Department of Corrections and the Guam Police Department's Mandania Drug Task Force carried out a shakedown of the prison, and that's nothing new for the prison. They do that from time to time, as well as their random drug tests that they're doing on their officers to make sure that everything, that the checks and balances all work out. So earlier we did see one of those guys being escorted in by detectives here, and we're waiting for the second. Again, the two that we're being told were brought here are Bruno Simmons and Sean Johnson. So we're waiting for the second group to make their way here, the second individual rather, as well as to hear maybe if the Department of Corrections might have any response to all this. So we're making our way around to the Department of Corrections for a Department of Corrections vehicle that's pulled in with the second inmate being charged here. Sean Johnson earlier, Bruno Simmons. And this again all unfolding from that prison contraband investigation over at the Manila compound. And there you have it, the walk being done here at the Agana precinct here in the island's capital for Bruno Simmons and for Bruno Simmons and Sean Johnson, the two inmates at the Department of Corrections who was pretty much being additionally charged with promoting prison contraband and that possession of a Schedule II controlled substance. This after the Guam Police Department's Mandania Drug Task Force worked to carry out a shakedown at the Manila compound last Friday and Saturday over Labor Day weekend, still going at it, strong with their investigation, and resulting in a find in both those inmates' cell. They just said it's contraband specifically, but of course we're learning that drugs is involved, because that is included in the charge for at least one of the pair that's being walked in here today. So right now they're brought in to the Gagnon precinct, where they will be processed, booked, and reconfined and brought back to the Milano compound. At least that's what we assumed at this point. We're not too sure if they're going to remain held in the max unit where that prison contraband was located, or whether that contraband made its way after all of this it unfolded in recent weeks with that arrest of several other officers. And so it really tells you like just what the investigators are trying to do here. Trying to clean house is what the Department of Corrections director had said when they first announced that or first carried out that that major bust over at the Manila prison last month, and on several homes as well. And so we're waiting to hear more from prison officials. Hopefully they'll get back to us today on that. But again, Bruno Simmons and Sean Johnson being arrested, rearrested, again charged with similar charges that they already face in local courts for their alleged part in that scheme to smuggle prison contraband into the Manila compound. So thank you guys so much for joining us. I think right now what we're working to do is see if there's any more developments, any new information that the Guam Police Department or that investigators might be bringing out to us at this time in light of this arrest. We did hear out of all this, after all this had first unfolded, that there may be more arrests being made in this investigation, but of course today we see that more arrests being made, but that it still involves 2 that were already originally charged, and that this time the charges stem from more contraband that was located and found during a shakedown at the Manila compound over Labor Day weekend. Department of Corrections inmates Sean Johnson and Bruno Simmons are being processed right now, being charged with similar crimes for what they already are facing of promoting major prison contraband, as well as one of them for possession of a Schedule II controlled substance after a shakedown conducted last Friday and Saturday in their cells at the Department of Corrections Post 6 Maximum Security Unit. Authorities confirming that they did find contraband, including what the charges tell are drugs. So again, this all stemming from last month's development where several Department of Corrections officers, including the head of Internal Affairs, as well as a couple of the staff members and a DPW worker, were arrested for their individual parts in this major scheme to smuggle contraband into the prison. It's been the motto that from the Department of Corrections since Director Tony Lamarena has been at the helm to clean house, to have that zero tolerance policy, no matter if it's against those that are being held there or those that work at the prison. All right, guys, thanks for hanging in there with us. We've just been showing you for the last couple of minutes a shot of the Agana precinct here after a couple inmates at the Department of Corrections, DepCor inmates Sean Johnson and Bruno Simmons being walked in for processing and being charged again for promoting major prison contraband and possession of a Schedule II controlled substance. Right now we are waiting to see if there is any further process the pair right now. Yeah, so this is the same two that got busted a couple weeks back alongside the Department of Corrections officers. It was Bruno Simmons, inmates Bruno Simmons and Sean Johnson, already facing charges of bribery and promoting major prison contraband, now facing an additional charge of promoting major prison contraband and possession of a Schedule II controlled substance after a shakedown just over the Labor Day weekend led to more fines for Guam police and for the corrections officers. And so they didn't say exactly what sort of drug was located or what other contraband might have been picked up during last Friday and last Saturday's shakedown, but they did confirm that it was in the cells of Bruno Simmons and Sean Johnson. And so those two, we've continuously been told, have been held in Post 6 in the maximum security unit. And after the recent arrest involving the corrections officers and the investigation, the contraband investigation there, they were separated and moved to separate parts, still within Post 6. That's according to Director Tony Lamarena, who we just recently spoke with about what kind of changes, shift changes they've been doing since all of this unfolded a couple weeks back. All right, guys, so again, just to recap what's happening here today, two Department of Corrections inmates re-arrested, being processed and charged again for similar crimes they already faced. Bruno Simmons and Sean Johnson charged with promoting major prison contraband and possession of a Schedule II controlled substance after Guam police worked with DepCor officials over Labor Day weekend to conduct a shakedown at the Manila prison. And they found more contraband, and then definitely the charges tell us that drugs were located as well. Specifics to that, further specifics have not yet been released. Earlier we did see the pair, the inmates being walked into the Agana lockup here, to the Agana precinct rather, to be processed. And where they'll be charged for this most recent incident, and then brought back. So they'll be brought back over to the Department of Corrections prison. Right now, we're waiting to see if there are any government leaders who want to chime in as well, as there's been a lot of hands involved in this investigation from the Guam Police Department on over to the Department of Corrections as well. All right, guys, and online with us to talk more and give some reaction. Maybe one of the leaders were hearing that Lieutenant Governor Ray Tenorio is standing by to speak with us and give his reaction. Lieutenant Governor Ray Tenorio, of course, leading the task force on public safety here in the territory, and so definitely we'll have some insight and perspective to just everything that's unfolded here since all of this has happened over at the Department of Corrections. Lieutenant Governor Tenorio, thanks for joining us.
Afade, how you doing?
Afade. And so I was telling our viewers here who've been watching just the situation that's been unfolding here. Of course, 2 Department of Corrections inmates being rearrested after investigators with Guam Police, the Mandani Drug Task Force, as well as DepCor officers found more prison contraband in their cells. And this is not just any cell. This is over at Post 6 at the Max Unit. And these are individuals being allegedly involved in that most recent scheme involving prison contraband and the Department of Corrections officers over there. What is your initial thoughts?
Well, I want to first tell Sejus Masi and congratulations to the Mandani Drug Task Force. The continued efforts that they're taking to apprehend persons responsible for drug and illegal contraband in the Department of Corrections is one that I think the entire community is concerned with. Tony Lamarena and Kate Baltazar are doing a great job in their leadership there and making sure that they're pursuing all leads and working with the Guam Police Department and the Department of Corrections to try to make it possible to bring these drugs and these individuals to justice is important. I recognize that the nature of, and this is true, by the way, of many correctional institutions across the state, the individuals that bring in these drugs vary, and they include everybody who walks into the institution. We have been working continuously to try to find those responsible, and we're going to continue to do that. Whether it be an officer or an employee, a civilian or a visitor or a vendor, anyone who's going to the Department of Corrections, we are going to search them, and we're going to go even more vigorously. Because if you can get drugs into the Department of Corrections, then you can get drugs anywhere else. I just finished a meeting right now, right during lunch, and I spoke to Senator Talina Nelson, and I want to thank her for her work in public safety. She's been a very active chairperson of in overseeing public safety. And I asked her to do the same thing that I mentioned during our press conference recently, which I want to create a single standard. Right now, there's a double standard for drug testing. Drug testing across the government of Guam depends on whether you're a bus driver or a police officer or a fireman, for example. They can get random drug testing at any time. But the rest of the government of Guam, you have to actually report the individual for suspicion of drugs. And the demand is driving the supply. If there's more people in the government of Guam, which is a significant portion of our population, that are using drugs without really any concern about anybody reporting them, they can use drugs without any worry about being caught. It's still going to be driving that demand, and that's met by the supply. So I asked her to consider looking at a bill to make a single standard for the entire government of Guam, because we have to lead by example. Everybody should be, including the governor, myself, and anyone else for that matter, should be subjected to random drug testing at any time. And if you value your government of Guam job, and I do, and I know the vast majority of employees do, they should know that if they're caught on drugs, that they will lose their jobs. And that's a serious consequence. But when you get to the government of Guam, we expect a zero tolerance for drugs. If you're going to work for this government and the people of Guam and the taxpayer pay for your compensation, we expect you to be drug-free.
And leading by example, no doubt, LT, but also it kind of makes people turn their head sideways and question, well, what is Department of Corrections doing? Are they doing their jobs now in light of that big bust involving their own? But then now, just over the Labor Day weekend, we see that there's more prison contraband, more drugs making their way inside what's supposed to be the most secure unit within the prison walls.
You listen, when you catch, and remember, I want to be very clear, there's a presumption of innocence for every person, whether you're an employee or an inmate. If you get caught on something, there's a presumption of innocence. So let's assume that everybody is innocent, all right? But if any individual is ultimately convicted of a crime, including bringing drugs in, that doesn't mean the drug flow stops. As a matter of fact, there's other people that may be involved in the process. And this is an entire island of 160,000 people. So we can't lead to some kind of illusion that we arrest a couple of guys and a couple of employees and we're going to dry it up. It doesn't work like that. There is a network of drugs that are coming into our community. And that's one of the reasons that I think slowing down the demand by a single standard for all government Guam employees is important. And as I mentioned to Senator Nelson, and I'm very happy she's heading up the behavioral health side of it, where people are going to be able to go and get more support from the legislature to get rehabilitation. But we also have to stop it at the source. We have to stop the demand. We have to treat those individuals who have been on the drug and be able to find their way back to being a productive member of our community. So there are multiple facets of this. And so if anyone thinks that just because we made a couple of arrests for employees, and no matter who they were in Department of Corrections or anywhere else, that you're going to stop the flow of drugs, then I think they need a serious reality check.
Definitely a lot more for the road ahead for this and for the investigators as well. Any final thoughts with the most recent rearrests happening here today?
Yeah, let me be very clear. This administration for 7 years has been working diligently on trying to stem the flow of drugs. This has been a case since I've been a police officer for many, many years, and now overseeing public safety. So this is not going to go away overnight. It's not going to stop just because you have a couple of guys who are arrested, even more for that matter. This drug problem is a function of the demand, of the supply, and having a better approach. And that's why we launched the campaign we did recently, and we're going to add to that. So I'm going to ask the people of Guam, through Facebook or any other venue, stop doing drugs for your own benefit. Not because we're going to crack down, but because you have in your life a better dream to realize for yourself. And it's not being drugged. It's not being high. You know, if you need assistance, seek it out, because when we get this entire system completely renovated the way I expect it to, with drug testing, with aggressive prosecution, with stopping those individuals who are currently on it and giving the behavioral treatment, what's going to happen, hopefully, is you'll have less money going into these illegal underground criminal operations and more money going into the pocket of your families and your businesses in the community. And that makes a lot more sense for our entire society than buying drugs.
All right, Lieutenant Governor Tenorio, his insight of the latest recent rearrest of a couple of Department of Correction inmates after the contraband investigation unfolding there. Lieutenant Governor Tenorio, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Have a great day.
All right, so there you have it. Just another recap as we're outside the Higanya precinct. We just heard from the man who's been leading the task force on public safety, Lieutenant Governor Ray Tenorio, and just how he pretty much said that there's still a lot of checks and balances that need to be made. Despite that arrest that involved Department of Corrections officers, that doesn't mean that they're completely done with wiping out the flow and the trafficking of drugs that also gets its way into the prison. And so then that just coming from the Lieutenant Governor of Guam just moments ago, as we had him live on the air for you right here on KUAM. And earlier we saw those two inmates, Department of Correction inmates, Sean Johnson and Bruno Simmons, being walked into the precinct for processing here in Naganya, where they'll be charged with similar charges again of promoting major prison contraband, and as well as an additional charge of possession of a Schedule II controlled substance after the Mandana Drug Task Force found some of that contraband and drugs during a shakedown last week, Friday and Saturday. And so rearrested and then charged again for those crimes. Of course, they're going to be taken back over to the Manila compound where they will remain held pending the outcome of this case. Again, a lot of those officers involved, both charged locally, as well as one at Crisostomo in the federal court for illegal possession of a firearm, all expected to return to the courtroom on September 14th. We, of course, will bring you the full report, as well as see if we can get reaction from the Department of Corrections today after this recent rearrest. For now, for Guam's News Network, Guahu Sinik Delgado.